Live from New York City, it's the Gary Null Show. And now, your host, Gary Null.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Null. Nice to have you with us today. From Miami Children's Hospital and Dharma Biomedical Center, new research showing a lot of health benefits from modified citrus pectin. New research published in the journal British Medical Journal Complementary Alternative Medicine shows that modified citrus pectin is extremely good for your immune system. In fact, the study uses human blood samples to demonstrate the ability of a specific form of modified citrus pectin to very significantly induce and enhance the benefits of T cytotoxic cells and human natural killer cells. Just so you understand, what are called NKs, or the natural killer cells, have strong cancer-killing activity, and it was demonstrated in live leukemia cancer cells. And along comes modified citrus pectin and further enhances that anti-cancer action. So that's very important. That's exciting news, something that is that easy, natural, non-toxic, but can make a big difference. And by the way, it also alters the course of certain viral diseases, such as the common cold and other upper respiratory tract viral infections, based upon the mechanisms of action that were observed in the study. So, one more thing to add, modified citrus pectin. And by the way, this significant increase in T cytotoxic and natural killer cell activation, together with remarkable increase in natural killer cells' ability to identify and destroy human leukemia cells, demonstrates that the tested modified citrus pectin is a powerful immune-enhancing agent. And that's good. That's really good. Anytime we can have something that's that strong and that easy to use, it's important. Also today, I'll get back to health in a moment, but yesterday, for those of you who were not able to get to it, I read out loud at the end of the show a very important, very deep commentary. It was called "The Clash of Crippled Ideologies is Leading the Nation's Demise." Richard Gale and I wrote this. And as I said in the opening sentence, you don't need to be an oracle to envision the future. All that's necessary is to examine our constraints and foibles. I mentioned that we're now facing a perfect storm of pain and suffering and destruction, unprecedented in American history. We have financial inequality, where more than 132 million Americans are now broke. When I say broke, I mean dead broke. We have 44 million Americans who historically had been on food stamps. Now that's up to 66 million hungry Americans, meaning they're food insecure. They simply don't have enough money to buy the food necessary to sustain a healthy life. And their children suffer also. Yet nothing is being done by either party about this. We have global warming, we have poverty, we have financial inequality and environmental migration and disease pandemics, none of which are being dealt with. Why not? Most of the people in this audience are reasonable people. And you'd simply ask, well, shouldn't we have the best and brightest of our scientists and thinkers and ethicists coming forward and helping us solve these problems? Here's the problem. In no small measure, over the last 60 years, it was these best and brightest who caused the problems. They were the architects of the Vietnam War, the weapons of mass destruction. They were the architects behind our destruction of our cities by outsourcing jobs and equity partners buying up successful multi-generational companies that have been here for a long time and selling them. Companies bought them and shipped everything out to China. No one took credit for that. Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, Bush Sr., Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, they were all responsible for this. And yet we act like Well, we don't have the jobs, and we have ghost cities, and we have rusted out industrial belts. We don't know how this happened. Yeah, we do. These people that you're relying upon today to give you the perfect vaccine for COVID ain't going to happen. To help you understand your financial crisis, why you don't have a job, let alone in some cases a career anymore. They're the architects. Same people, same institutions. They're getting richer, more powerful. Everyone else is suffering. So I wrote a commentary. It's posted on prn.fm. It's free. Go there and download it. Also today, I'm going to share some very powerful, and you can watch it in real time by going to prn.fm, but you can listen to it as well. Crimes Against Humanity. Dr. Rainer Fulmich, one of the international criminal trial lawyers who is part of a consortium who are holding tribunal hearings, much like the Nuremberg tribunal hearings, and interviewing hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists, physicians, investigators who are simply deconstructing all of the crimes against humanity based upon how the COVID virus has been handled. You'll have him on. Also, the lockdown skeptic Richard Malady will be on. He says there's nothing going on here except naked media manipulation. And then I want to have on two professors. We've had the gentleman on, not his wife. She's a professor of sociology. They both had tenured positions at a state university, and agitators, provocateurs, not on their college campus, came on and demanded they be fired. And the students, their own students, supported them, but pressure was put on the administrators, and the president ended up booting them out. This was a travesty. So now they have their own live stream show, and they're taking on white fragility, which, as you will hear them say, is racist. Now, you've heard me say that if you're going to read white fragility, and a lot of, unfortunately, white educated women are reading it and then becoming fanatical about it, that yes, every white is racist, they're born racist, then those same women should read Hitler's Mein Kampf, My Story, from 1922, and look at what that led to. Look at what that led to for the Jewish population and for the world at large, and for the gypsies and the communists and everybody else that stood in the way of the white, the Aryan supremacy genetically. It was a travesty, one of the worst in world history. And look at the genocide that occurred from that. Do you not think that there's going to be the potential for a major social upheaval when you start declaring that a white person, simply because they're Caucasian, is a racist? And if they deny being racist, that means then they are a racist. The rights and freedoms of women, indigenous cultures, African Americans, Latinos, everyone who has been suppressed, if it weren't for our efforts as abolitionists, as fighting for freedom and dignity of all human beings, there would still be slavery. So to have some moronic text, racist text, that is so vile, and yet that is the new Bible among the so-called woke. All right, hear what they have to say. Let's begin by continuing on with the latest on health and healing. From a health institute in Japan comes research about the Japanese black vinegar. It's found to be effective against metabolic syndrome. There's your heart disease and diabetes and high blood pressure. Now, have you ever heard of the Japanese black vinegar? It's simply known as kurozu, Kurozu. It's a mild-tasting vinegar that's been brewed by artisans for more than 200 years in the town of Fukushima in Japan. It's also called amber rice vinegar, and this condiment is produced by slowly fermenting a mixture of rice and water in black ceramic jars using a microbe called Aspergillus oryzae. And this ferment is the same mold used to produce miso, M-I-S-O, or sake, or soy sauce, all of which are widely used in traditional Japanese and are very good probiotics producing really good bacteria. So in this study, the Japanese researchers examined the effects of a dietary supplement containing the fermented product, Kurozu, on the accumulation of visceral fat. By the way, visceral fat is the type of fat that builds up in the abdomen, in the cavity there, and is considered dangerous because its links to obesity and insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. Well, the results were published in the Japanese Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine. It can also help prevent metabolic syndrome, as was found. Talking about good bacteria, according to the Rudin University in Russia, the bifidobacteria help manage inflammation. Now, this is a Russian publication called Anaerobe, and the findings are that this particular bifidobacteria is extremely good at blocking pro-inflammatory cytokine tumor necrosis factor alpha, meaning it turns off inflammation, helps protect from cytokine storms that can damage everything in your body, your lungs, your heart, your brain, your joints. So write it down, bifida, B-I-F-I-D-O, bacteria, all one word. And get that into your system and you're getting good bacteria into your gut. From University of Maryland, doctors, nurses, and therapists have a prescription for helping all of us get through these difficult times. Try a little laughter. Laughter may be effective as a medicine of sorts for these trying times. Now, some enlightened doctors and nurses and therapists have a prescription, and that is you got to start laughing. We know from all the scientific literature that humor is not just a distraction from the grim reality of the crisis, but it also is a winning strategy for staying healthy and facing it. The more stress you're under, it magnifies the risk of cardiovascular events, including heart attack and stroke. Having a good sense of humor is an excellent way to relieve stress and anxiety and bring back a sense of normalcy during these turbulent times. And also, laughter releases nitric oxide. That's the chemical that relaxes blood vessels, reduces blood pressure, and decreases clotting. So that's good news. So laughing every day can make a difference. Hopefully a lot each day. Also, from University of California at Irvine, as well as University of Copenhagen, they found a chemical in medicinal herbs for hypertension or high blood pressure. And it's in many common herbs. And this was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. What they found was that here are the herbs that are good for high blood pressure: lavender, chamomile, ginger, fennel seed extract, basil, thyme, and marjoram. They all showed that you can use these to treat hypertension, and they activate a particular potassium channel called KCNQ5, and this potassium channel is found in the vascular smooth muscles that line the blood vessels. So, good science showing herbs can make a big difference in our life. And from the Ludwig Institute of Cancer Research, published in Nature Immunology, they found that nucleamide riboside can boost cancer immunotherapy. So that's important because anything that has anti-cancer immune response is good, and this does exactly that. And I know many of you are already taking NAD, and you're taking B-complex, and you're taking the nicotinamide riboside, or what is known as NR, and that helps. All right? And finally, a new study suggests that binge drinking could damage your brain and cause lasting anxiety. This is the University of Porto in Portugal. This is a brand new study. Now, we know a lot of people in college do binge drinking. What we didn't know was that it can damage your brain and increase the risk of cognitive behavioral issues like anxiety for the rest of your life. In fact, just 10 days of binge drinking can cause immune cells in the brain to destroy connection between neurons, which leads to anxiety and other mental health issues. So that's important. So that's one of the reasons why you shouldn't drink or shouldn't binge drink. And also for Norwegian University of Science and Technology, when children write in longhand, it makes them smarter. Typing, clicking, and watching occupy an increasing number of hours in the average child's day, but brain research shows that writing by hand helps people remember better and learn more. That's based upon the new brain research, shows that writing by hand helps children learn more, remember better, and is simply better for them. That's the latest on health and healing. We're going to take a break, and when we come back from our break, we're going directly into our final segment of Crimes Against Humanity. Now, the mainstream media is not interviewing these lawyers and doctors and scientists because they want us to believe that everything is being done scientifically and properly. It is not. They want us to believe that the death statistics are accurate. They are way off. They want us to believe that if you test positive by a PCR test, it's accurate. It is not. And they want you to believe that if you're a young person and you test positive, then you actually have the actual infection alive in your body and you can spread it and get sick and die. And that is rarely the case. When you do get an infection and you have mild symptoms or no symptoms, you overcome it like you would most other kind of infections. And think each year how many people get sick and die from the flu or pneumonia in the flu, tens of thousands in the United States, but we don't close down society. A lot of people are vulnerable depending upon the state of their immune system and any comorbidities. So if you look into all athleticism, and if you took, let's say, 1,000 football players and 3 of them had the COVID virus positive antibodies, it does mean they're going to be sick. And if they are sick, they would normally get sick from the flu in a given year also. But we quarantine those people, and we don't allow them to mix with other people, spread their germs, but we put it in proper perspective. Nothing's been put in proper perspective, and these lawyers are going to be holding a tribunal, and then they're going to start issuing lawsuits. I'm just giving you the heads up on all this. Back in a moment. Please stay with us.
The test cannot distinguish inactive and reproductive matter. That means that a positive result may happen because the test detects, for example, a piece of debris, a fragment of a molecule, which may signal nothing else than that the immune system of the person tested won a battle with a common cold in the past. Even Drosten himself declared in an interview with a German business magazine in 2014, at that time concerning the alleged detection of an infection with the MERS virus, allegedly with the help of the PCR test, that these PCR tests are so highly sensitive that even very healthy and non-infectious people may test positive. At that time, he also became very much aware of the powerful role of the panic and fear-mongering media, as you'll see at the end of the following quote. He said then, in this interview, if, for example, such a pathogen scurries over the nasal mucosa of a nurse for a day or so without her getting sick or noticing anything, then she's suddenly a MERS case. This could also explain the explosion of case numbers in Saudi Arabia. In addition, the media there have made this into an incredible sensation. Has he forgotten this, or is he deliberately concealing this in the corona context, because corona is a very lucrative business opportunity for the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, and for Mr. Alfred Lund, his co-author in many studies and also a PCR test producer. In my view, it is completely implausible that he forgot in 2020 what he knew about the PCR tests and told a business magazine in 2014. In short, this test cannot detect any infection, contrary to all false claims stating that it can. An infection, a so-called hot infection, requires that the virus, or rather a fragment of a molecule, which may be a virus, is not just found somewhere, for example, in the throat of a person without causing any damage. That would be a cold infection. Rather, a hot infection requires that the virus penetrates into the cells, replicates there, and causes symptoms such as headaches or a sore throat. Only then is a person really infected in the sense of a hot infection. Because only then is a person contagious, that is, able to infect others. Until then, it is completely harmless for both the host and all other people that the host comes into contact with. Once again, this means that positive test results, contrary to all other claims by Drosten, Wheeler, or the WHO, mean nothing with respect to infections, as even the CDC knows, as quoted above. Meanwhile, a number of highly respected scientists worldwide assume that there has never been a corona pandemic, but only a PCR test pandemic. This is the conclusion reached by many German scientists, such as Professors Bakti, Reis, Mölling, Hockertz, Wallach, and many others, including the above-mentioned Professor John Ioannidis and the Nobel laureate Professor Michael Levitt from Stanford University. The most recent such opinion is that of the aforementioned Dr. Mike Yeadon, a former vice president and chief science officer at Pfizer, who held this position for 16 years. He and his co-authors, all well-known scientists, published a scientific paper in September of 2020, and he wrote a corresponding magazine article on September 20th, 2020. Among other things, he and they state, and I quote, "We're basing our government policy, our economic policy, and the policy of restricting fundamental rights presumably on completely wrong data and assumptions about the coronavirus. If it weren't for the test results that are constantly reported in the media, the pandemic would be over because nothing really happened. Of course, there are some serious individual cases of illness, but there are also some in every flu epidemic. There was a real wave of disease in March and April, but since then, everything has gone back to normal. Only the positive results rise and sink wildly again and again, depending on how many tests are carried out. But the real cases of illnesses are over. There can be no talk of a second wave." The allegedly new strain of the coronavirus is, Dr. Yeadon continues, only new in that it is a new type of the long-known coronavirus. There are at least 4 coronaviruses that are endemic and cause some of the common colds we experience, especially in winter. They all have a striking sequence similarity to the coronavirus. And because the human immune system recognizes the similarity to the virus that has now allegedly been newly discovered, a T-cell immunity has long existed in this respect. 30% of the population had this before the allegedly new virus even appeared. Therefore, it is sufficient for the so-called herd immunity that 15 to 25% of the population are infected with the allegedly new coronavirus to stop the further spread of the virus. And this has long been the case. Regarding the all-important PCR tests, Yeadon writes in a piece called "Lies, Damned Lies, and Health Statistics, The Deadly Danger of False Positives," dated September 20th, 2020, and I quote, "The likelihood of an apparently positive case being a false positive is between 89 to 94%, or near certainty." Dr. Yeadon, in agreement with the professors of immunology Kemmerer from Germany, Capel from the Netherlands, and Cahill from Ireland, as well as the microbiologist Dr. Arve from Austria, all of whom testified before the German Corona Committee, explicitly points out that a positive test does not mean that an intact virus has been found. The authors explain that what the PCR test actually measures is, and I quote, "simply the presence of partial RNA sequences present in the intact virus, which could be a piece of dead virus which cannot make the subject sick and cannot be transmitted and cannot make anyone else sick." Because of the complete unsuitability of the test for the detection of infectious diseases, tested positive in goats, sheep, papayas, and even chicken wings, Oxford professor Carl Hennigan, director of the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, writes that the COVID virus would never disappear if this test practice were to be continued, but would always be, falsely, detected in much of what is tested. Lockdowns, as Yeadon and his colleagues found out, do not work. Sweden, with its laissez-faire approach, and Great Britain, with its strict lockdown, for example, have completely comparable disease and mortality statistics. The same was found by US scientists concerning the different US states. It makes no difference to the incidence of disease whether a state implements a lockdown or not. With regard to the now infamous Imperial College of London's Professor Neil Ferguson and his completely false computer models warning of millions of deaths, he says that, and I quote, "No serious scientist gives any validity to Ferguson's model." He points out with thinly veiled contempt, again I quote, "It's important that you know most scientists don't accept that it," that is Ferguson's model, "was even faintly right. But the government is still wedded to the model." Ferguson predicted 40,000 corona deaths in Sweden by May and 100,000 by June, but it remained at 5,800, which, according to the Swedish authorities, is equivalent to a mild flu. If the PCR tests had not been used as a diagnostic tool for corona infections, there would not be a pandemic. And there would be no lockdowns, but everything would have been perceived as just a medium or light wave of influenza, these scientists conclude. Dr. Yeadon, in his piece Lies, Damned Lies and Health Statistics, The Deadly Danger of False Positives, writes, "This test is fatally flawed and must immediately be withdrawn and never used again in this setting unless shown to be fixed." And towards the end of that article, "I have explained how a hopelessly performing diagnostic test has been and continues to be used not for diagnosis of disease, but it seems solely to create fear." Now, let's take a look at the current actual situation regarding the severe damage caused by the lockdowns and other measures. Another detailed paper written by a German official in the Department of the Interior, who is responsible for risk assessment and the protection of the population against risks, was leaked recently. It is now called the false alarm paper. This paper comes to the conclusion that there was and is no sufficient evidence for serious health risks for the population as claimed by Drosten, Wheeler, and the WHO. But, the author says, there's very much evidence of the corona measures causing gigantic health and economic damage to the population, which he then describes in detail in this paper. This, he concludes, will lead to very high claims for damages which the government will be held responsible for. This has now become reality, but the paper's author was suspended. More and more scientists, but also lawyers, recognize that as a result of the deliberate panic-mongering and the corona measures enabled by this panic, democracy is in great danger of being replaced by fascist totalitarian models. As I already mentioned above, in Australia, people who do not wear the masks, which more and more studies show are hazardous to health, or who allegedly do not wear them correctly, are arrested, handcuffed, and thrown into jail. In the Philippines, they run the risk of getting shot. But even in Germany and in other previously civilized countries, children are taken away from their parents if they do not comply with quarantine regulations, distance regulations, and mask-wearing regulations. According to psychologists and psychotherapists who testified before the Corona Committee, children are traumatized en masse, with the worst psychological consequences yet to be expected in the medium and long term. In Germany alone, 500,000 to 800,000 bankruptcies are expected in the fall to strike small and medium-sized businesses, which form the backbone of the economy. This will result in incalculable tax losses and incalculably high and long-term Social Security money transfers for, among other things, unemployment benefits. Since in the meantime, pretty much everybody is beginning to understand the full devastating impact of the completely unfounded corona measures, I will refrain from detailing this any further. Let me now give you a summary of the legal consequences. The most difficult part of a lawyer's work is always to establish the true facts, not the application of the legal rules to these facts. Unfortunately, a German lawyer does not learn this at law school, but his Anglo-American counterparts do get the necessary training for this at their law schools. And probably for this reason, but also because of the much more pronounced independence of the Anglo-American judiciary, the Anglo-American law of evidence is much more effective in practice than the German one. A court of law can only decide a legal dispute correctly if it has previously determined the facts correctly, which is not possible without looking at all the evidence. And that's why the law of evidence is so important. On the basis of the facts summarized above, in particular those established with the help of the work of the German Corona Committee, the legal evaluation is actually simple. It is simple for all civilized legal systems, regardless of whether these legal systems are based on civil law, which follows the Roman law more closely, or whether they are based on Anglo-American common law, which is only loosely connected to Roman law. Let's first take a look at the unconstitutionality of the measures. A number of German law professors, including Professors Kingreen, Morswijk, Jungblut, and Vosgerau, have stated either in written expert opinions or in interviews, in line with the serious doubts expressed by the former president of the Federal Constitutional Court with respect to the constitutionality of the Corona measures, that these measures, the Corona measures, are without a sufficient factual basis and also without a sufficient legal basis, and are therefore unconstitutional and must be repealed immediately. Very recently, a judge, Thorsten Schleif is his name, declared publicly that the German judiciary, just like the general public, has been so panic-stricken that it was no longer able to administer justice properly. He says that the courts of law, and I quote, have all too quickly waved through coercive measures which for millions of people all over Germany represent massive suspensions of their constitutional rights. He points out that German citizens, again I quote, are currently experiencing the most serious encroachment on their constitutional rights since the founding of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949. In order to contain the corona pandemic, federal and state governments have intervened, he says, massively and in part threatening the very existence of the country, as it is guaranteed by the constitutional rights of the people. What about fraud, intentional infliction of damage, and crimes against humanity? Based on the rules of criminal law, asserting false facts concerning the PCR tests or intentional misrepresentation, as it was committed by Messrs. Drosten and Wheeler as well as the WHO, can only be assessed as fraud. Based on the rules of civil tort law, this translates into intentional infliction of damage. The German professor of civil law, Martin Schwab, supports this finding in public interviews. In a comprehensive legal opinion of around 180 pages, he has familiarized himself with the subject matter like no other legal scholar has done thus far, and in particular has provided a detailed account of the complete failure of the mainstream media to report on the true facts of this so-called pandemic. Messrs. Drosten, Wheeler, and Tedros of the WHO all knew, based on their own expertise or the expertise of their institutions, that the PCR tests cannot provide any information about infections, but asserted over and over again to the general public that they can, with their counterparts all over the world repeating this. And they all knew and accepted that on the basis of their recommendations, the governments of the world would decide on lockdowns, the rules for social distancing, and mandatory wearing of masks, the latter representing a very serious health hazard, as more and more independent studies and expert statements show. Under the rules of civil tort law, all those who have been harmed by these PCR test-induced lockdowns are entitled to receive full compensation for their losses. In particular, there is a duty to compensate, that is, a duty to pay damages for the loss of profits suffered by companies and self-employed persons as a result of the lockdown and other measures. In the meantime, however, the anti-corona measures have caused and continue to cause such devastating damage to the world's population's health and economy that the crimes committed by Messrs. Drozd, Wheeler, and the WHO must be legally qualified as actual crimes against humanity, as defined in Section 7 of the International Criminal Code. How can we do something? What can we do? Well, the class action is the best route to compensatory damages and to political consequences. The so-called class action lawsuit is based on English law and exists today in the USA and in Canada. It enables a court of law to allow a complaint for damages to be tried as a class action lawsuit at the request of a plaintiff if 1. As a result of a damage-inducing event, 2. A large number of people suffer the same type of damage. Phrased differently, a judge can allow a class action lawsuit to go forward if common questions of law and fact make up the vital component of the lawsuit. Here, the common questions of law and fact revolve around the worldwide PCR test-based lockdowns and its consequences. Just like the VW diesel passenger cars were functioning products, but they were defective due to a so-called defeat device because they didn't comply with the emissions standards, so too the PCR tests, which are perfectly good products in other settings, are defective products when it comes to the diagnosis of infections. Now, if an American or a Canadian company or an American or Canadian individual decides to sue these persons in the United States or Canada for damages, then the court called upon to resolve this dispute may, upon request, allow this complaint to be tried as a class action lawsuit. If this happens, all affected parties worldwide will be informed about this through publications in the mainstream media and will thus have the opportunity to join this class action within a certain period of time to be determined by the court. It should be emphasized that nobody must join the class action, but every injured party can join the class. The advantage of the class action is that only one trial is needed, namely to try the complaint of a representative plaintiff who is affected in a manner typical of everyone else in the class. This is firstly cheaper and secondly faster than hundreds of thousands or more individual lawsuits. And thirdly, it imposes less of a burden on the courts. Fourthly, as a rule, it allows a much more precise examination of the accusations than would be possible in the context of hundreds of thousands or, more likely in this corona setting, even millions of individual lawsuits. In particular, the well-established and proven Anglo-American law of evidence, with its pre-trial discovery, is applicable. This requires that all evidence relevant for the determination of the lawsuit is put on the table. In contrast to the typical situation in German lawsuits with structural imbalance, that is, lawsuits involving on the one hand a consumer and on the other hand a powerful corporation, the withholding or even destruction of evidence is not without consequence. Rather, the party withholding or even destroying evidence loses the case.
And now, the biggest flaw of white fragility.
So this thing that we were just showing you guys is really, it's straight out of this crazy Robin DiAngelo book, White Fragility. It precedes that by a lot. Actually, I found an essay that I wrote from 1991 in which I'm pointing out the pitting of modernity versus postmodernity, which I'll actually share a couple of bits from as well later. So, to those who say, you guys helped create this beast, no, we didn't. We're not copying to that. Just no. But James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, Helen Pluckrose as the people who put together that grievance studies expose, I guess. They don't want to call it a hoax. This precedes DiAngelo, but it's the current Bible of the moment. So in the last episode, I attempted to steelman maybe her most irritating point, right? The idea that all white people are racist. And I said, well, if you understand that she's redefined what racist means, and now what racist means in her world is that you are accruing benefits from an historical system of racism and inequality, then it's true. Yes, if you have white skin, you continue to accrue the benefits from an historical system of racism and inequality. That is true. But redefining the keyword and the sentiment is cheating. Here are some other things that happen in the book that, you know, I hope you don't have to read it, but if you do, she conflates systemic problems, and this is to that redefinition of the word racism. She conflates systemic problems with individual ones, while claiming to be very clear on the differences. So it's kind of it's a bait and switch with regard to the system is rigged and therefore you are racist. Well, no, you can't do that. Individuals and populations are different. She also conflates a biological understanding of humanity, which is part of what we are trying to share with the world, with social Darwinism. So social Darwinism, as a phrase in which both are capitalized, is a long debunked bastardization of Darwinism, which has nothing really to do with an actual evolutionary understanding of the world. But this bastardization, known as social Darwinism, suggests that current social conditions are inevitable and good. You know, it's an excuse for why the rich are rich. The rich are rich because Darwin said so, because nature said so. No, that's wrong, and that's not how evolution works. But she makes this kind of point, and thus slotting scientists like us into this twisted and archaic belief system, she sort of just leaves that for her adherents to come back to. She posits, among other things, that if we are indeed all equal, which many of us believe us to be, the only explanation for disparities in condition must be the result of discrimination. And here she's conflating equal with identical to, right? Equal and identical to are not the same thing. She rails against the way that Black History Month is celebrated because she says it reinforces whiteness. This will not be the first time, if you're reading this book, that you face a dilemma. You can't win. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Should we then not celebrate Black History Month? Well, then silence is violence. But if you do celebrate it in any way at all, apparently, then you're doing it wrong and you're further demonstrating your racism.
Well, silence is violence, and saying the wrong thing is violence or its equivalent. Therefore, your choice is to repeat after us. And the problem is there's then no basis whatsoever to object on the because what's being said is incorrect, which almost all of it is, or because the policy proposals that are being advanced are going to lead to the destruction of things on which we are all depending. There are lots of, and this, of course, happened to us in Microcosm at Evergreen.
Yep.
Because the primary, among the many objections, I would say the primary objection to what was being advocated was that it would destroy the college, and that lots of people, including us, including our students, including the very people that they were claiming to be helping, were depending on the college being functional, and driving it into bankruptcy wasn't going to help anybody. So
that's right.
Was there language at Evergreen to say that you were actually about to cripple the college and that nothing that you're talking about could possibly be accomplished if you do that? Nope, because the very fact of objecting meant that they were going to portray you as racist.
Yes, because the movement has named itself cleverly, and this is not the first time we've seen this. There are many examples of movements like this. Antifa is one. Frankly, pro-life is one. But anti-racist, no, actually not. I'm here to say I'm anti-racist, and that does not make me racist. No, because the movement is named in a way that is designed to trap you. And so to go back to the book specifically for just a couple of moments, if you don't view race as the single most defining feature of the human experience, you are, according to the book White Fragility, both racist and in denial. Used to be, of course, that viewing everything through a racial lens was what made you a racist. Well, times change, don't they? So this book is a hot mess of sloppy scholarship and cherry-picked data, but that's not actually its biggest flaw. Let me just quote D'Angelo herself here, a couple times from the book. She says, "I have been unable to hide my surprise that the black man is the school principal. Of all white people," she writes, "I realize that we see ourselves as entitled to and deserving of more than people of color deserve." Wow. she's right about one thing. She's racist. Like Robin DiAngelo's actually racist. And it seems that it's possible that it's her personal racism that is projected on all the rest of white America at the moment that's given jet fuel to riots that started as protests that were good faith and had a germ of necessity at the core of them, that we now have a totally chaotic and undefensible movement. So if you don't share Robin DiAngelo's racism, as in fact the vast majority of Americans don't, your defensiveness at being misunderstood and caricatured, as many of you who have had to sit through some of these workplace trainings will have experienced, that's going to be held up itself as proof of your racism. And your desire to defend yourself against false claims being evidence of your white fragility, your white supremacism, is in fact, it's another rhetorical trick, and it's, I think, the central Kafka trap of the entire book. You are X. No, I'm not. By denying that you're X, you've proven that you're X. Classic Kafka trap, and that's the only bit of argumentation in the book that she actually engages in.
So I like this model. It makes a lot of sense to me. Here's the question I have.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't assume that Robin DiAngelo is well-intentioned. She's obviously getting quite wealthy, advancing this particular wrong set of ideas.
Yeah.
It is possible, though, that, we have argued that people have better access by orders of magnitude to what takes place in their own mind than they do to the next closest mind to them, right? You can see into your own mind, not perfectly. There's lots of stuff that happens in our minds that we can't see, but but we do have some access to what goes on inside of our own minds. So Robin DiAngelo, looking into her own mind, has discovered some completely preposterous stuff, and
Offensive.
Offensive if you look at it. And it's. I'm not sure I would say it was racist, because the question is, does she want to see it that way? It's clearly prejudiced, right? But the point is,
I've been unable to hide my surprise that the black man is the school principal. I mean, these are just two. It's riddled throughout the book.
Oh, right. But
that's her speaking.
So she
And
clearly has
these
this
are the examples
prejudice.
she has shared.
Right. Well, here's the
God.
point. She has effectively portrayed all. She doesn't know what's going on in other people's minds.
Yeah.
So having looked into her own mind, maybe she's just decided, her mind is a good model for everybody else's, and it isn't.
She's put a mirror up to herself and then declared that she put a mirror up to society. And she's trained as a sociologist. Putting a mirror up to society is what sociology is supposed to be. Of course, sociology is long since captured and ridiculous. Not everyone. There are some excellent sociologists out there, Nicholas Christakis being one.
She sociology suggests it's more scientific than it is. I would say she's on the sociopath.
Oh, good.
I don't know. It was inexpensive, so I just thought I'd try it out.
Yeah, so you did.
Are those crickets?
Yeah. We still need that cricket audio.
We need the cricket audio. Yeah, but anyway, it does seem like she is projecting, and one would imagine that she knows better than this. But even if she doesn't, how tragic is it that we are going to grind civilization to a halt over a misunderstanding over whether what goes on in Robin DiAngelo's mind is a good match for what goes on in everybody else's mind? So I don't know. It's stunning.
Yeah.
I will point out,
Yeah.
a friend of ours on Twitter may have solved the problem, cut the Gordian knot, as it were, with respect to white fragility.
Oh, wow.
So somebody had asked
who is this? Oh.
what to do in the case their employer was insisting that they read White Fragility.
Sure.
And Dave suggested that the answer to this was, I'll read that if you'll read 1984, which struck me as a very good answer.
Thank you for your work. I am a person of color working at a religious private school. I just signed up for a book club to read White Fragility with colleagues who are mostly female, white, upper class, etc. Any advice? Wow.
Buckle up.
Yeah, buckle up. First of all, your description of the demographic descriptors of the other people who are in this book club is telling and is typical. It does tend to be pretty much middle class and upper class white women who are promoting this particular book, this particular screed that is so filled with hatred and ridiculous thinking. And that, why that might be is a conversation not for right now, but for another time. But I would say at one level, you play the idiocy of the book to your advantage in order to get them to listen to you. If you are the person of color in the room and you are listening to us and therefore at least have some suspicion that the book is not what it claims and is divisive rather than unifying, if they start disagreeing with you, point out that they actually have no leg to stand on in this room because you are the person who is suffering rather than them. I just don't see anything dishonorable in playing their game on them at the point that they would insist on winning, regardless of whatever else is true.
I might come at it slightly differently, but in part, we don't know what you mean by POC because let's say you're Asian.
And we also
right?
don't know
you will
from
be blamed.
Early on into this entire pandemic, I kept looking at Sweden and some other countries that did not honor what the world consensus, especially America and Great Britain, total lockdown, total quarantine. They didn't. They didn't close their schools. They didn't close the businesses. They didn't demand masks. They simply said, be prudent, social distancing. Well, guess what? They are the ultimate example. And here's the proof. Here are the latest official statistics from Sweden on deaths from coronavirus. And if you're watching it, you'll see the charts where Spain is way up, the United States is way up, Great Britain is way up in deaths. But Sweden is flatlined. You'll hear the numbers. Sometimes 0 death in a day, 1. All right, this is the reality. We should be following Sweden's mandate, not the United States or Great Britain.
We are due for an update from Sweden, aren't we? Well, why don't we start with this? Deaths per million from August 6th to October 6th, just yesterday, in comparison to Spain, France, and us in the UK. Well, Sweden are embarrassing us. Here's the latest on Google regarding death rates. Let's go backwards, starting with the most recent. Just a couple of days ago, 5th of October, 0 deaths. The day before that, 1. The 3rd, 0. The 1st, 0. Going into September, 1, 0. 1, 2, 4, 1, 0. Similar picture throughout September, throughout August, and going all the way back to July. Simon Dolan, the guy heading up the Keep Britain Free campaign that's taken the government to court over lockdown restrictions and measures. This is a recent picture that he took from a recent trip to Sweden. This is the high street, all looking very, very normal. If you wear a muzzle in Sweden, you get a funny look rather than the other way round, rather than getting kicked and punched and harassed for not muzzling up like you do in this country. Now you get funny looks for wearing one instead. And as if I needed to remind you that Sweden didn't lock down. They kept their schools open, their businesses open, pretty much left everything open. And what they did instead is they put some social distancing measures in place and put their trust in the people and went with the herd immunity strategy. With tougher and tighter restrictions happening, well, look at what's happening right now across the north. More and more restrictions being put in, local lockdowns, talk of another national lockdown. With all of this going on, and with experts and scientists like Hennigan, Gupta, Levitt, all of them top scientists, top experts, top epidemiologists coming out to support strategies like Sweden's, it must be getting really, really difficult to continue to justify the lockdowns that we continue to face.
That's our program today, everyone. Please go to prn.fm and look at how you can sign up for the free newsletter. Go to prnstudio@gmail.com and you can sign up. It's free. Also, look at the more than 38 self-empowerment videos, all free, that can help inspire you during this difficult and challenging time. Have a nice day, everyone.